A couple of months back, a friend of mine helped me obtain some very interesting price data on some cards, which I thought, you know what, now when I have the time, and yeah, I'm on vacation, but well, this is what I do in my free time sometimes, at least when the wife is out of the house. Good afternoon, anybody out there, and welcome to my channel. If you've never been here before, well, usually that's because I'm streaming lectures that are not of interest to you, but today I'm actually trying to combine a few things that I like to do. So, as for a living, I teach a lot at the university, and many of my classes involved also doing some sort of statistics. And well, since I like Pokemon cards, well, there's a nice place to put them together and see if I can conduct some analysis here. And a couple of months back, a friend of mine helped me obtain some very interesting price data on some cards, which I thought, you know what, now when I have the time, and yeah, I'm on vacation, but well, this is what I do in my free time sometimes, at least when the wife is out of the house. So let's just work it through and see where it takes us. And well, I take any suggestions you may have. I'm actually just going to sit here and work a little with the data as we go along. And don't be afraid if you don't understand much what's going actually on my screen up here. That just happens. A lot of you won't know Stata, the software I use. Others, they may know some programs, but maybe using others like SPSS, R, MATLAB, you name it, eViews. There's many of them out there. And well, you know what? We're just gonna, go ahead and see what I can figure out here today. Now, there's a few things I want to adjust here first, because one thing I find very annoying is that my camera is actually flipped. So let's see if I can actually go and do a nice flip here, if I can do it like this. There, then I'm pointing the right way. All this OBS magic, still setting up a few things, so let's see how that's going to work out. So let's just start by taking a look at the data I actually have here. So first, I'm just going to load in the data set here, and then let's take a quick look. If everything is fine, you should be able to see my second screen up here. And let's just take a look here at the data set here. Let's enlarge this so we can look. It looks more like an Excel sheet. And what do I actually have? Well, I have a date variable here, which starts on November 26th in 2015. The name of the card that I have now in my database, the price of the card that given moment, the block from which the card belongs to, so this is a black and white card from the black and white series, and the image URL. Well, some things are interesting here, some things are not so interesting here. Why do I have the image URL? Well, I used to actually make a price race video with that way back, so that's also why I need an image of each of these cards. And this dataset here, it contains only full art supporters. If this works out very nicely, I can download for other cards and conduct a similar analysis. That's the cool thing about writing a script for this here. I can literally just reuse it for other analysis and change a few things. So that's what we have. So I have N here, and well, I may start in November 26th, 2015. How far does this actually go? Let's take a look. Let's just go to the bottom of the data set. This will be the last card that's in my data set in this case here. That is the single strike style mustard rainbow rare. And that goes on the 6th of May this year, so 2021. That's 2015, that's 4 years of data plus a little extra. 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. 5 years plus a little bit. I'm on vacation, as you can see. Counting, we don't do that much about that here. So we at least try. So for this card here, as you may have seen, this is the last one of the data set. It means I do not have Chilling Rain in here. This stopped in May, of course. That was before the release or before we had any card data. All the data here, I should say, is downloaded from Card Market. So when you go to Card Market, you look at a given card, whether it's a Charizard, Pikachu, or whatever card you're interested in, you will see this little price graph up in the corner, up in the upper right corner. That's this price graph that I basically got scraped off here and downloaded here into this data set thanks to a buddy of mine. So thank you very much. Even though I'm on vacation, I still drink a shit ton of coffee. So for any students out there, well, that has not changed at all. Now, let's go back to the script and see what we have to work with here. I first changed a few naming conventions. I realized that was a mistake afterwards. Like there was an extra space after Morgan and Morty. So a lot of cards, the apostrophe it's called, was missing. I just want everything to be nice, right? So all these replace of the names here will correct all these naming conventions that was mistaken. Then there's a lot of price corrections, and it's always good to explain when you start correcting your raw data, otherwise people start pointing fingers and think like, you are just manipulating data to your own good, and while they may be true for some people out there, they do that. I'm not calling anybody out, but you do think that may be the case sometimes. Here, let me explain what actually happened. So let's first zoom a little bit, because I have a feeling that your screen is a little small, a little text here. So all these price corrections here, for instance, the price was all the price here are in euros. So we had a price for AC that was €1. What happened here on card markers, or something I could confirm later, is that sometimes there's somebody who uploads wrongly a card. So there will be, they upload a regular AC under the full art AC, and somebody bought it. And then of course that will be registered as €1 sale price, which of course is not correct. So I manually went in and checked all these. Well, I basically just looked at the most ridiculous price cards at the end here. So for instance, like, I know How is cheap, but 50 cents for a How, for a full art How? I don't think so. And Milo for 5 cents, Skullgrunt for 5 cents. These kind of things are obvious mistakes. And I corrected, of course, to the other lowest price that we found. So instead of dropping the price, thereby creating holes in my data set, I just did sort of a winterizing, you could call it, for those who know it, but I just correct the price a bit. This hopefully should not do a big difference to the overall analysis. We can always just try it without. But let's just run all these lines of code here. You can see I already spent some time on cleaning the data, set some analysis and whatever, but the actual analysis I haven't done yet. So that I'm going to do here while I'm live here with you guys. And just sit here and see what comes out, and see if we find some interesting things around here for this price data here. Before we get so far, I need to set up a date variable here. And, there's a lot of conventions depending on which program you're using. But you saw all that I have a date variable in here, or I had one that was called date. But that is sometimes hard to see and hard to also make any calculations with, or any of the analysis that I'm going to do later. So actually I generated two variables. I converted first this date variable, which I called now date2, into a starter format. I also created date num. That is for the simple reason that in Starter, every date is corresponded with a number. Number 1 being sometime in 1960s, I believe. You can look it up on Google. So each of these dates will correspond. Each of these numbers will correspond to a different date in Stata. So now I also realize this video will be very good for students to watch back for as a tutorial for Stata, because a lot of them, they have to use this program on the bachelor's and masters. So in a couple of weeks I'll start up my course. It's in 4 weeks from now, 4 or 5 weeks, we start off the course again when we use Stata. So I assume all my students, they know it at this point, or they can take this video and some of the others I have on my channel, just to get rolling with all this here. Let's minimize that one again. So you see here that we have a strongly balanced data set. Simply this meaning here, according to the panel variable, which is the ID I created. So there's an ID number for each of these supporters. BN, Bianca, Sharon, Single Strike Mustard, you name it. Whatever full art supporter is in there. They're all in there, all up included to, that will be Battle Styles is the last set. And you see it starts from November 26, 2015 and ends on May 6, 2021. So not going to spend so much time on that. Let's go down to where it actually becomes quite interesting. So first of all, I'm starting generating all the variables that can help me explain. Because a cornerstone in this analysis here, I could just dump in the price and see how the price moves over time. I'm going to do that. I'm going to, put up a graph, then we can see how it evolves. But if you want to conduct some actual analysis on this, you should also have some explanatory variables. That is, I'm going to conduct some regression analysis. I would like to say up front, this may not be the most correct way of doing it. Some of these things, I may make a lot of mistakes, but I'm just doing this as we go along, as a, practicing for the school year, let's call it like that, or just, because I like to do data and I'm a nerd by profession, right? Like many others out there. So first I generate a variable, 4 dummy variables to be exact. Dummy variables are variables that only takes on the value 0 and 1. 1 and 0, that's how we do it. And then I rename all these blocks, because we of course have 4 blocks in here. You may be already like, why is Black and white is the first block, sure, but why is XY the last block? Well, that's because the alphabetic order it was generated in, so I have to, go and change the names. So it fits. Sun and Moon will be the third block in this case here, so actually block 2, and Sword and Shield will be the fourth block. So I consider 4 blocks here. We have 4 main blocks, black and white, followed by XY block, followed by the Sun and Moon block, and now the latest block is Sword and Shield. So now I have 4 dummy variables, one that accounts for all the cards in black and white, one that accounts for all the cards in Sun and Moon, Sword and Shield, and XY. Alphabetically ordered here, of course, but I, of course, changed so it fits. I actually only found this mistake recently, right before I had to go live. I was like, oh, AC was Sword and Shield? That makes no sense. That's an obvious... Wait, I can do this. XY Phantom Forces, right? Yeah, something like that. So I was like, okay, let's go and fix that and, get on with it. Then... Again, if you have any suggestions for variables I could include here, let me know. So the first one I thought about, what? I need to have a gender indicator here. Yeah, I'm considering only male, female. I apologize to anybody out there who thinks that it's not binary, but for the sake of this analysis, I'll keep it binary. That makes it a little easier. So I give a 0 if the gender on the card, so if there's only a male on the card, or what I believe to be a male character. I'm not gonna lie, I had to look up some of these names to be sure was this character male or female, according to at least Bulbapedia. Had it not been called, for instance, Ball Guy, I would also have been looking up what is this thing? What is this creature? I don't know. But okay, so I set the gender equal to 1 if all these characters here, which are, by this extent, female. And a note here, yes, on the Welder card in English at least, you don't see it's female, but we know from the Japanese print it's a female, so I count that one as a female. That also gets a 1. So Welder's included in here as well somewhere. There it is. So, and of course, if the card is not yet released, then of course I also put the gender to be missing value, which is denoted by a dot in this program. So if the price is 0, which indicates that the card didn't hit card market yet in this case, then I will put it as a missing value. You will see why that is a good idea later for when I, go along with my analysis. There's also a few cards there where there's a mix, I would like to call it. So first, I have 2 versions of the gender variable then. I will have gender 1 and 2. 1 is just what is clear, just one female versus not. And the other one is that there's also a mix. Like, for instance, let's take Aether Foundation employee. There's 2 people on the card, male and female. So I make actually 2 in this here. So you also have Team Yellgrunt. You also have Team Rocket's Handiwork. There's multiple people on it in mixed genders as well also. At least from what appears on the card. And then of course I make a distinction between those as well. So here's where I make my second variable with all these distinctions here. So you can also see if I look at those cards next to each other. So for instance, I will tabulate just gender. Then you see here, at least in the dataset here, of the 120,000 marked observations here, around 53,498 will be denoted as female. Whereas if I go to gender 2, that one number should be a little higher because I include more cards, of course. So if I go here and look at gender 2 here, then this should hopefully be a little higher if it was made correctly. And yes, indeed it is. It goes up to 64,509. So there's a rough difference of what, 11,000? Something like that, 11,000 observations. Actually, one thing is interesting I want to check really quickly is how many observations are there actually in total in this data set. This little tiny number you see here in the corner here says 363,978. This is spread out on, from the top of my head, I think 183 different supporters, which that's a lot of supporters already, and this number has only grown real fast because with the introduction of Chilling Reign, that was a huge number of supporters. Even for my own personal collection, I still missed one. So if anybody had a full art Caitlyn out there, let me know. That's the only one I'm missing. The rest is complete. And yes, I include rainbow rares as well. Some of them are pretty, some of them are not, but I just include them. Which makes for at least, well, I think we passed over 200 English prints, of course. So if that's not been clear yet at this point here, we consider just English cards. What other variables could I include to explain this here? One thing I thought of was, well, besides these gender variables, I could just include whether the card is currently in standard format or not. So I will give it a 1, because assuming when the card gets printed and enters card market, it's standard legal. That's at least the assumption. That's the assumption I made. I may be off by a few dates because some cards may actually hit card market before they're actually standard legal, because there's a couple of weeks in between before the card is given our privileges to it actually is legal for gameplay. I'm not considering that here, so there may be a small mistake somewhere here and there. that would take way too long to do. And it already took me a long time to do this here, so quite a while. So I'm going to go over this here and correct me if you see any mistakes here. There are possibly a few mistakes in here, but this is just to see how you could be doing it, and this is also by no means the most efficient way of doing it. I actually believe there's way more efficient ways of doing it, but this is the way I can document myself and I can remember what I did. Because otherwise it's going to be one of those cases where when you first write the code, only 2 people in the world knows it, and that's you and God. And after a while, only God knows what's happened in your code when you read it back. And I want to, be able to understand my code at a later date. So I generate a variable that I call standard. That is again a dummy variable, so it's just a 1. In this case here, there's no zeros in it because I just know it to be a 1. But as a dummy, it takes only 2 values when I'm done with it, 0 or 1. So, of course, I will say here, for instance, I will just start with the first card in the line is N. That actually was reprinted a few times, so I had to actually look up quite a bit when was N actually in standard and out of standard. So I do not remember it being out of standard then in again. Maybe I'm wrong, but I know it was reprinted in Fates Collide. It was also in a promo print, Black and White 100. So what I did here for now, and this may be wrong, but I rotated out of standard here for this here when Fates Collide rotated. That's what this date marker here, 21,423 notes. That's the day, at least from when I looked up for the rotations on Bulbapedia, when Fates Collide rotated. So that's where N rotate out of standard format, and therefore the standard dummy here will take on the value 0. Now, then comes all the different ones, the blocks and whatever. All the cards that did not have a reprint are very easy to disentangle, very easy to deal with, because they will, well, be simple. They just follow the block rotation once a year. Like, for instance, if I have some cards, we have a special case here. Trump, Lysander's Trump card got banned. Oh, it's a D missing. Let's add it there. That got banned, so that was also in a certain date that I had to put that one away. We also have all these cards here that actually never hit standard format in this data set. Because I only gather data from November 26, 2015, some of these cards in this set here was never part of standard format, at least in this here. They already rotate out, so cards like Bianca, Charon, Colress, Jetsis, Juniper, and Olsnar, Guzma, for instance, they were never in standard format in this data set at all. Why is Delinquent, Guzma, Full Art, these kind of never in standard format? Well, that's because when they were released in the Best of XY series, at least that's what they're called in Japanese, English translation, then they were already rotated out standard at that point. So they never hit standard in this format here. Then I have Skyla that was since reprinted, so that means Skyla actually went out and then in again later with the release again in Rebel Clash. That was at least the latest reprint of Skyla, or wait, that's not the latest reprint, but that was when the regular Skyla was reprinted, so you could use the full arts, the older full arts, also in standard. We have a newer full art. Skyla actually has 3 different full art cards in English. If I'm not mistaken, in Japanese actually has 4. Let me know in the comment section below. That would be a nice note because I'm actually quite unsure about that. So that one also had to be treated differently. We, of course, here had all the things that went out in 2016 rotation. Then I had Pokemon Centerlane that was reprinted. I had Pokemon Fan Club that was reprinted. I had Team Flare Grunt that was also reprinted in Generations. I had Shauna that was reprinted in Fates Collide. All these different things had to be tackled differently. So they didn't go out with just the block rotation, they actually came back in. Because remember, just because it's no longer the actual full art card that's printed, you can still use the full art card if just the card with the same text is printed later, even though there's just regular art. I noticed in starter here there's different commands you can also use, like motivate. That should be able to motivate your research. So I did not mess up the syntax, I just found 100 ways to specify it incorrectly. On the other hand, you actually also have commands called demotivate. So they'll also give you something like, we need to stop thinking like a graduate student, especially if you are one. Oh. They're really nice to you. You can see, so you have something motivating to say, something demotivating to say. Thanks, I guess. Yeah, let's carry on, otherwise I dwell with this too much. We also went out with 2017 rotation, 2018 rotation. We had a few reprints here in Hidden Fates. That was Brock's Grid, which is also in Team Up. Because Brock's Grid actually has 2 full arts, the Super Saiyan one and the not Super Saiyan one. And then we have 2019 rotation. Finally, we had the 2020 rotation. This is still made before the 2021 rotation, thank God, otherwise there'll be a lot of cards to actually account for. And again, everything that was not yet in with a price can also not be in standard. So that's the current setup here. We're just going to redo all this here. And if I haven't said that earlier, I'm also dropping the image URL because when I look at the data, that takes up a lot of space and I don't need it for this analysis. So what do we actually have at this point? This may be a good point just to take a look at the data set again. So I've got quite a few variables here. We see we have the two gender variables here. Of course, I'm looking at AC here because now it's sorted alphabetically. So of course it looks from AC first. You can see AC belongs to the XY set. It was currently not in standard at this point here because the card was not printed yet. It's also why it doesn't have a price. I believe no price is 0. Let's go down and actually see how it looks like. See here the price of AC was $5.95. It went down to $5.90 again. 2019, 4.5 through most 2019, went all the way down to €3. AC has been relatively cheap the whole time. What makes a card expensive we can look at later, but I already have quite a few variables in there. Now the next thing I can do is incorporate a tier list, and this is why I actually made a total of 5 different videos with different YouTubers. So in no particular order, I did it together with Teosum, I did it together with Playscapes Game, Omnipoke, the Slowpoke Well, and PG Radio. They were all kind enough to join me in a video where we were tier listing the different blocks. Why 5 when there's 4 blocks? That's because I chopped off Sun and Moon into 2 because that was massive in the terms of the sheer number of supporters that were in there. That was actually quite insane. So I'm actually just making the tier list here. You see the tier list went from A, B, C, D, E, and F as really the worst tier. I decided to say, okay, tier list is 1 if you're in F category, you get 2 if you're in E category, and all the way up to 7 points in this case if you're in A category. There's of course some assumptions made here, like for instance there's an equal difference going from F to E, then the same going from B to A, but so be it, I would consider that to be the same. So of course the higher tier list number you have here, the better you are on the tier list, the better effect you would have in this case, I believe. You could also, of course, have kept that away. That would just flip the interpretation. But I kept it simple here. So you can see all the cards tiered here. So you can see what was in the tier list here. If you want to see how, detail about the tier list here, you're welcome to go back and watch any of the videos. They're all there. And again, also, if there's some things that's hard to understand stats, I suppose you're trying to learn as well, want to see what we're doing here, you can always just try the starter playlist. Everything is there. Or feel free to ask any questions you may have. Now we can actually go into the actual prices and start working a little bit with the total prices, because those are something I thought that would be cool to make. I can of course just make the prices here for each of the portfolios. So black and white through Sword and Shield, and also a total price one, which of course just the sum of the 4 others, but you don't have to define it as a sum here, but I can just do it this way here. So doing this here, you see all these cool things here. I think actually I made some graphs later we can take a look at, but let me first generate the last couple of variables. Then we're going to look at some graphs, and then I can just do some simple econometric analysis. Not going to do something too complex here, just show a couple of regressions here, and then we can see, what actually influences a different card style, or sorry, card price, my bad. And then we can see, what actually matters, and if anybody has any suggestions, we can fill on this at a later point. May condense this discussion here into a smaller video and put it up on the channel, YouTube channel in this case here, just for people to watch back, and maybe for my students to see some of these things in practice that is not on a regular financial data set. But what is most important to actually take away here from an academic point of view, or from more also a practitioner's point of view, all the analysis you learn in class can be used on whatever data set you may have. It doesn't have to be on regular firm A, firm B, or currency or whatnot. So that's also why you typically see me just use these alternative data sets, because why not? Like, the analysis tools are the same, and you don't confine yourself only to use on financial data. Suppose you took a degree in finance, you can use in whatever else. Now, so I can also do by the number of cards that are in a different portfolio here and how many cards there are in total. So for instance, now if I look at, I'll just tabulate this variable here. It should go from 1 till 9 indeed, so there'll be up to 9 cards in this black and white portfolio. One thing I should very much note here, I believe that the alternate print N, best of XY, was actually included here, even though that was released later, but I decided to, since it was a reprint, just alternate art, little yellow A in the corner, then I included here. So there you can see also how this actually works. I can do the same for the X and Y portfolio. How many cards do we have in there? You will notice that this one starts at 0. That's because in the beginning there was of course no XY cards because we're only busy with the black and white block. It means it goes up until 30. You can do of course the same with Sun and Moon, which obviously should be a much higher number because there's 86 Sun and Moon full art supporters. And then of course you have Sword and Shield also, and this number is maybe higher than some say it should be. This one says 58. That's because I included rainbow rares. You could of course exclude rainbow rares and only look at cards that are not rainbow rares but just traditional full arts. But I decided to include that here also because I collect them myself as well. So let's see. Did I actually number of cards, then I can generate the average price per portfolio. So I can do that for each of the portfolios, and then of course the average card price overall. That's what I've done here. So this would show, when I graph it, how the average price evolved for each of these portfolios over time, and also for the overall portfolio. Now we can also say what the number of female character cards in here are, based on the gender variable, not gender 2, just the normal gender variable. I can also do the same for number 2. Like I can also say, let's just generate that here. Do exactly the same. I'm just going to call by number female 2 because this bases itself on gender 2. So again, I just copy paste in my code. That's how easy this actually becomes once you've written it once. Then of course I can calculate the proportion of female cards in the portfolios. So this is just the overall proportion of female cards. I can of course also do this just for each of the different blocks, but now I just did it for the overall. Now I made a lot of cool graphs here first, or at least I wrote in the code. We're going to extend a few of them right now, and then I'm going to look at some different analysis tools here in the bottom. Now you can see my cursor a little bit. So I can of course just graph the price for a block over time. So for instance, let's see how this works, if it works properly. I should, if everything goes well, I should be able to get not a perfect graph. It's a little slow in generating graphs. Maybe it could be because I'm not using my full capacity here, but for instance, I show 9 of these supporters in here. Of the 10, I believe I'm missing 1 if I'm not mistaken. So you can see the price of each of these cards here over time. This is not a really great graph. I can of course also just stack them to make them just in one go. Let's try to do that in a moment, but this just shows over time. So now, yeah, that's a nice graph. Not so much to say about that there. I can of course also stack them all together, so I get all these different supporters in just one graph instead of in this 9 individual graphs. There's actually 10. Oh, let me see. What is it here? Block. Wait, what if I just... Why am I doing this block here where I can actually do it smarter? Why do you think I made this variable called black and white? That was because then I could do it like this. This should hopefully work. Yeah, that should... at least it runs now. Let's see if it comes out with something nice. Oh, auction if is not allowed. Oh, that's because I misplaced it. Let's try and put it over here. Boom. There we go. Now, you see there's all 9 cards here. And of course, this graph is a mess. You can't actually really disentangle what the hell is going on here, which is why it may be easier to stack them, not stack them, just have them individually, or just do it for a card or a couple of cards over time. So that was not so much fun. Let's see if I just use it for N. Let's just use it for the regular N. That's a little cooler. And I even also fixed the labeling a little bit and the ticks and whatnot. So hopefully this should look a little better. Now, let's see here. This is a little more easy to look at least for the eyes. So you can see how the price of N actually fluctuated over time, soaring all the way up to what looks around 65 euros. That's quite expensive. And also, you see here, this is before it actually entered the dataset here. So you see it's just 0 until this point, which snuck in above 40 euros. It's actually been, over time, you could actually buy Ns at some point for all the way down to around 5 euros, which is incredibly cheap. I heard a lot of people, they just scooped up a lot of Ns to around 10 euros. that's a good investment. I think that card is only, all these cards here, all these collectible items, if they're in good condition over time, even if they're in less than perfect conditions, decent at least, they should increase over time. And that's also what you see a lot of these things here. People are treating more and more things like investments, which I'm not here to say whether it's wrong or right. I'm just saying you can. And it also means you can, of course, for your own collecting purpose, it's very nice to know the value of your things. Like I've gone through a lot of valuation of my cards over the last couple of months because it becomes an insurance question now. If you're sitting at home, your cards are way too valuable. You don't get a proper insurance for them because you didn't valuate them, because some of them would need a taxation report or whatever not. And then you're unfortunate enough to get them stolen. You're, in Dutch it's called inboedel, or your insurance, at least for all your household items, that won't cover it, at least won't cover enough. So if you sit with some very, very priced collection, get a proper insurance, get it done quickly, because there's nothing worse than, not being able to, recover your losses. I know a lot of these things here are, they're irreplaceable, I know that, but it's still better to get something out of it than not at all. So you have a better way to actually get back at it again. So I'm just saying that's something you should seriously consider if you have a very valuable collection. Now, I can also, of course, also just play a little around with adding in when at this point, when in this graph here, would N rotate out of standard to see how that actually affected the price. So I actually doing exactly the same graph now, I believe. And now, yes, I just put in a dotted line from when it rotate out of standard. And it's interesting to see that for whatever reason, it became a little more expensive right after, and then the price decrease came in. You can see there's a quite significant price drop here, somewhat after rotation happened. Let's look at the total portfolio price here. This is where it becomes, I think it starts becoming actually quite interesting to look at. So let's look at the overall price here. I think I made a mistake because this looks more like a Gini coefficient rather than anything else. So let's see if I did this correct. Why did this happen now, and why not two-way line, total price? I'm actually just going to try and run this in a simplistic way and see what happened. Oh, I think I know what's wrong. That is something to do with the sorting. I need to sort the date. So let's see, sort date 2. I think it's because some of the observations were sorted. So of course, if you get some of the first observation at the end, it will sort it that way. And I don't know why. Sometimes you just need to resort your data sets. Now it's sorted according to date, and let's see what actually happens. This should hopefully fix it, and it did. So now what we see here, that the total portfolio value, of course, increased over time. It makes perfect sense that the price goes up because you get more and more supporters in the portfolio over time. So naturally, this one would tend to go upwards. It would look like what we call just an increasing series, or to use a more fancy term, this may actually, if I test it, be denoted as a random walk, possibly with a positive drift. You can always test this with a Digifuller test if you're not familiar with those. To look up at unit root tests or check back in my class. Then you can actually see how this is going, or how this is being conducted. Or turn back on this channel here in a month or two and I will explain during my live class session. That's also why I generate the average card price, so we can look at that one instead. That one may be a little better here, so let's just take a look at the average card price. Let me see, I can do that for the entire portfolio here. So this is the average price for a card in the portfolio. And you can even see that it went up here in the last while. So once we got into the end of 2020, you see a steep increase. And it actually makes sense according to what everybody saw in the market after this Corona lockdown happened at the beginning of 2020. So that would be around here, if I could just label this a little more precisely. But you see here, this is November, so we're already at the end of 2020, but you see a steep increase by the end of 2020. Of course, also have something to do with the influx of cards, but again, this is just the average price, so yeah, you do see there's a significant price increase here towards the end. And of course, this becomes less jagged as we add more cards, so it becomes more smooth. Looks a lot better, at least. And this is what you need to see. You see a steep price increase here. You can, of course, also just do it for the individual blocks. I've done this for one block here. This is for the black and white block. And we can, of course, also, I have it for the XY block here below. But let's, for now, actually just put the blocks together so we can actually see what blocks are more expensive, like average price card wise, right? So I can look at the average card for black and white. We can add in here for X and Y in the same graph. I can of course also add in for sun and moon. So let's type that one in. And I of course can also add in for sword and shield. SWSH is what I called it. Program even helped me here. So let's first run this and see if it works. You indeed see here how it works, and you see also when it was introduced. Of course, the sword and shield that started very expensive per card. That was actually rather insane. But remember that at this point we don't know if all the cards for sword and shield were in. So you do see how the prices tend to evolve over time. One thing you do notice very quickly, look at black and white for a moment here. That's the blue line here. So you see that it's the average price for a card in the black and white portfolio. So all the first ones, Juniper, Colress, N, Iris, so forth. You see that they had a point here were rather cheap towards the end, beginning of 2020, in 2019, so before pandemic struck. And then you see the price increase of these cards just went up massively towards the end of 2020, beginning 2021. You see this same idea here. You see the same idea happening with XY portfolio, same high increase. But of course, these cards are not as old, some of them at least. And for the Sun and Moon portfolio, that is the green line, you do see the same increase again, where Sword and Shield is actually still stabilizing. So this is already a lot of interesting things in graphs here. I'm already like, whoo, this is cool to look at here. We of course also look at how the proportion of female cards changed over time. So this is the proportion of just the regular female cards. So no, I did not include the ones where you have multiple genders in. We can actually do that in a moment. But here you do indeed see here, there was actually a point here towards end 2016 where most of the cards were female supporter cards. That's actually quite interesting to notice, and then they even it out over time. This almost looks like the law of large numbers with coin flips being in effect, where of course the theoretical mean says the theoretical average says over time this should approach 50%. This looks almost like it. By a fun fact, if you want to get that tested, it's also done in one of my other Pokémath videos where I did it together with Gyroshawn. That was a lot of fun. A lot of Magikarp coin flips. Go take a look. It's quite amusing. Now, let's actually take the same here. First, I need to take the number of female cards, also according to gender 2. So you see that's the one I made here. So let's actually make a new proportion of female cards, just call it with the number 2. So number of female 2 divided by number cards. This should also generate the proportion of female cards, including those with additional characters on. So as long as there's just a female character on, regardless of how many, we just include it here. So that's something. So I call it proportion female 2. Let's go down here and actually make a new line here under this. There. And let's put this one here with a 2. And let's see if this actually works. It's always interesting to see. So yeah, this is what you see. Of course, the proportion would be higher if you include the others, but the picture kind of remains the same. You see actually at some point when that actually was made a distinction that was not before sometime in 2017, so the first couple of years, we only had like, there was one person on the cards, that was it. That actually changed a bit over time and it's been rather constant since then. So this is quite interesting to see. Some other things to look at here for once. So let's put this one down. And now let's go and take some quick analysis view here. There's of course 3 overall different types of data sets we can look at. We can look at cross-sectional, which we'll start with here, I think. That is just, we say at one point in time, we have the observations. So if I have 183 supporters and I take it the last data point, so this is the last date in the data set, that was sometime in May this year, and I can make analysis at that point. That's one way of doing it. We can also do time series, of course. So we can just look at the price over time. So you look at one entity or one portfolio, one price, whatever, and move it over time. You can, of course, combine the two and you get a panel data set. That is, you have multiple entities, in this case, multiple supporter cards, and you look at them at multiple periods in time, which is what we did here. So I'm going to just do some simple analysis with each of the 3 things and see how each of these different factors, well, work. So for instance, let's first do this here. So I'm going to do a preserve, because if I do the analysis afterwards, I want the data set to go back to the way it was before. So let's do that here. Let's rerun everything up to this point. And then of course we can just slim in the data set here and we can run a simple regression. Let's just try that. So I want to run a regression. Well, I want to see what influences the price. So for instance, on price, I want the influence by this gender variable that I created. We can also look for different dummies of these blocks. The dummies here for XY, Sun and Moon, and Sword and Shield. What other things did we create here earlier? I think there was something with a tier list. That's definitely something we can include as well. And standard, of course, not to forget those. So this, of course, can be done a little more fully fledged, but with more variables in there. But let's just do the standard one, and then we have tier list. And I'm gonna, for econometric purposes, not gonna go in detail why, but I'm just gonna run robust standard errors here because we like doing that. Let's run this here and see what we actually get out. So a couple of notions first. I ran into what we call the dummy trap, so that was pretty stupid. Students can call me out on that one, no problem there. That is, of course, if they all are, well, one of the variables a linear combination of the others, then you get this problem here. So I'm gonna change black and white to be my reference group. Let's just run this regression again because I don't want to see this omitted here. Stata does fix it automatically for you and nothing changes, but I just like to remove it so we don't have to look at it right now. What we do see here, I have 183 observations. So of course there's 183 different supporters out there. And let me see here. What happens here? And of course these are in euros. So what do we see at this point in time here? Now let's look at the first one here. If there's a female card, if this card is just a female card, you see the average price of a card goes up by roughly 12 euros, everything else held equal. So if you switch from male to a female card in comparison, you see here an increase of about 12 euros on the value. Call this the waifu effect, call this a Lily effect, or call this whatever you wanted. You notice here there's a big difference. All these different block variables here, they are what we call not significant. That is that there are no statistical difference here observed. So I'm also not going to interpret these here. But what you do notice, and that was also something I find very interesting, if you look at the standard here, if the card is valid in standard play, not to say not expanded, but just standard play, the price is typically rounded about 8 euros higher. You can also do 2 decimals, so 7 euros and 68 cents more. So if a card belongs in the standard format currently, we see here that roughly it is 7 euros and 68 cents more expensive on average, which is quite interesting to note because now we can actually quantify this difference based on these cards here. Now, that I find very interesting. Now, finally, we also have the tier list here. And this one should be interpreted a little different because remember the tier list went from 1 to 7. So we have different tier list points here. So yes, we could use other more sophisticated analysis tool, hierarchical models. We can split this up in different dummies or whatnot. But now I just kept it together in one categorical dummy, 1 to 7. And yes, it's significant at what we call the 5% level, so I would deem this to be statistically significant. Let's, we're not here for statistics class, we're just here from statistics. Fun on the side here. So what we see here, for each step up in the tier list, what can we say about a card compared to, say, if they're bottom tier, when they go up from F to E or E to D, you see for each increase in the tier list by 1 level, you see an increase in the price of roughly €1.11. That's not too bad. We can, of course, try and extrapolate on this. You can move this 6 times, you get €6.60. Actually, 666. Yes, that's the devil's number, I guess, but okay. That you can actually see. That's what we can say if you just look at this from cross-sectional point of view. Not bad. I already think we got something very interesting out of this. That's like, I would say, analysis tool step 1. Now, depending on what we look at, now we can also look at the price of this whole portfolio over time. Now, we already know there are some problems. When I looked at that price graph, remember, it just went up and up. And that is simply because, well, there's more cards added to the portfolio, but let's just try and work with that for a bit anyway. So I'm going to construct what we call an autoregressive model. That is, I'm going to regress the price on its own past values. For simplicity, I'm just going to stop with an order 1. I'm going to do this preserve thing again and restore. So everything I create in between the preserve and restore here will be undone after this block has finished. So I'm going to generate the lag price. But actually, I don't have to generate this because I can do that directly in the regression call. So let's just not do that right now. Now, let's look at this total price here. I think let's just try it out. And again, I need to think a little more about this. This is just what as you can see here, I have not done this yet, so I'm just doing this on the fly. Same with the analysis we just did for the cross-sectional part, but let's just try for this time series part. So what do I want to look at? I want to look at this total price. You remember from this total portfolio I had up here? Was that this one here? I believe that was it. Let's look at this one again. Again, this date has to be sorted. Sort date 2, and then we run it again. That was better. You remember this graph here, it just went up and up. But let's just analyze this time series, how this affects over time. Let's just do that just to try and do some analysis on this. I think that would be quite fun. So I'm going to use total price. That's what I'm going to try to explain. So we regress the total price on its own lagged value, so what we call an AR1. What else can we try and put in here? We can try to look at the... First of all, let's just try and run this and see if it actually comes out with something interesting. Maybe I need to sort according to the date first. So let's TS set this in a date. Is that the correct way of doing it? I have an idea. First, we're going to run the data set again, just so we're up at this point here again. Let's see how this looks. Indeed, we have the total price in the data set here per day. That's what we actually wanted. So now I should be able to actually have the way I want it here. Then I need to, of course, TS set the date. So I have to tell Stata that, hey, this is a time series now. TS set date 2. Hopefully this works. You see here, one day goes from number 26 onto this day here. I don't think I need to sort it, but it cannot hurt. And of course, if I should be able to do this by now. There we go. Now we actually see something that's very interesting here. I actually managed. That was very good. Now, because of course I made all the stupid mistakes you can do, but well, this is also where you can see how it is in the making. So what did I do? I changed my data set from being a panel data set, what we had here, into just a time series. So I just looked at a total portfolio value over time. So you can see here I collapsed, compressed, or whatever you want to call it, the data set to just be one observation per day. So we disentangle all these different supporters on these different days. We just took what the average value for the portfolio is per day. That of course won't change, because of course for each observation on November 26 for each of these supporters here, the value of the total price would have been the same. If we take the average of all these same values, we get, well, no surprise, the same again. Therefore, no problem. Then I can run this kind of regression here. What do I observe here? So for a lot of people who are not used to seeing this time series regression here, seeing this kind of coefficient here indicates that I have what we call a random walk, or actually even an explosive series. That is not good. There's a lot of reasons why it's not good. Let's just say that I cannot really trust what's coming out of this here, because what we're getting here is something that is very hard to disentangle. Because we are seeing that the price from yesterday carries over today with basically 1-to-1 plus a little extra. That's essentially what we see. And that's also why you see in a graph it goes up. So one thing we could benefit, instead of looking at the total price here, we can look at the return for holding such a portfolio. Now, that is something I think is interesting. So we can generate a variable that is to represent the return of holding a portfolio. So I can just call it R total price, RTP, which of course I'm going to generate what is known as the continuously compounded returns, which is just the log difference between this total price divided by total price yesterday. Then I transform this into returns, and I can run the same again on the returns, which should now hopefully have solved this issue that we have just seen. So you notice here this turns into what actually is denoted more as a white noise. So actually the price over, you see that there's no inherent structure. That's what we can say, that there's no information from yesterday that carries over today. The relationship between here is, well, hard to say. Can't really say much about it, to be honest. But again, these are like nice, interesting tools we can use here. I can of course also just plot this over time, and you can see what I mean. Let's just see what we have here. A two-way line of return for price for date 2. It should hopefully produce the plot I wanted. Yeah, you see here it moves over time like this. It doesn't disentangle much. There's a few there is a few here in the beginning here, the introduction of a lot of cards. Actually, when the portfolio is small and it gets larger over time, you get something that is a little less good. I could also look at the average price to the total price. Again, this is what you get when you make things on the fly. Already, when I think about it right now, I'll benefit greatly from doing just on the average price, because then, of course, I already took into account the number of cards in such a portfolio increases over time. To flush out this effect, you can just take the average card price here. That also, what we saw on the graph earlier, already helps a lot. That means let's go to the final bit of data I could use, because actually there's a lot of reasons why we should use panel data. Now, when we have all the information, let's just take a look at it. And then we can actually do some real cool analysis. So I can actually just, for simplicity or for speed, I can use what we know as a panel regression here. I'm going to be applying a fixed effects first. That's just the panel terminology term here. You should look back in the class if you're not sure what this is, but okay. So we want to try to explain the price as a function of gender, each of these different blocks, the standard format dummy, and the tier list. And I'm going to use robust standards for no reason. I can already tell you, I'm going to use fixed effects. I can already tell you there's a number of these variables that won't show us anything. Why is that so? Because a downside of using what is known as a fixed effects regression is that something that is time invariant, i.e. does not change over time, for instance, the gender of a card doesn't change over time, as far as I know at least. The block a card belongs to doesn't change over time. The tier list that was graded for us here, in this case it does not change over time, although that may actually could be updated so it would change over time, but that would be rather large endeavor, which means that we only left with the dummy, or the dummy for standard, because that one actually goes from 1 to 0 and maybe to 1 for some cards. So a fixed effects regression per se is not a very good estimation technique to choose for this here, at least here, because we have so many things that are either not moving at time or at all, they don't change, so we can't really get an estimate for them, or they move very slowly like standard. So ignoring the potential issues there is with a so-called random effects model, then I'm going to use that instead. There are some obvious issues. Visit the class, visit your textbook for that. But the upside is here, I do get an estimate for these things that otherwise would be very hard for me to, well, I didn't get anything before. Now, for interpreting this is a little more difficult, I would say, because we are including what is known both within card and between card effects. So within the same card over time. So for instance, if you're looking at an N over time, so the difference is within all this over time. And at the same time, we're also looking between the different cards over time. So we're also looking at how a card looks over time within a card, so between values of N, or the value of N versus other cards, like N compared to a chair, and N compared to a Bianca, N compared to whatever. There's a lot of different things we have to take into account here, which makes this interpretation a little harder. But we can at least talk about what direction it takes, and we can also try and see how much. So What we do observe here, for a given card, over time, and difference between cards will be something like for a given card within the card between, it becomes very tricky to analyze here, but you do observe, you see there's a positive coefficient attached here to the value gender here, which suggests here that a female card in this case here, or for the way gender specified here, there's a single female character on a card, say a Lily or a Bonnie or Cynthia or any other card, Lucamine, best card ever, don't hate me, sees that the value here will increase. So again, confirming the fact that if you have a card with a female character on, the card's more expensive. We can also see if the card belongs to the XY block here, that makes it cheaper, compared to the base value of black and white, because I did not include the black and white dummy, which makes my base value black and white. That actually makes sense why it would be lower then, because the cards are the oldest in black and white. So the older the card in good condition, the higher value it should be. That also means when you compare it to X and Y, Sun and Moon, you see that of course that the value is lower. Why Sword and Shield may be higher value now, that is I think for the simple reason that they are in standard format. But again, we don't see statistical differences on Sun and Moon and Sword and Shield here, only for the XY value here. We also see here standard is significant, and you see if a card is in standard actually, it lowers the value. That's interesting, because that was different from what we saw earlier. However, what you do notice that the value is very small, so it's only a very small difference. And we also notice again, the better the card, at least according to this subjective tier list that was made in the previous episodes with other YouTubers here. Thanks guys for, participating, it was great. Then you do notice here that the higher on the tier list, the more expensive the card is. Let's do a little simple thing here. I want to take out these X, Sun, and Sword and Shield dummies because I think they interfere with this standard for quite a bit. I think that actually may change the things a little bit. So I hope. Let's try this again. So you see here standard is larger value than 0.16, smaller value actually. But now you also see that it didn't change a lot, to be honest. A lot of things don't change here. The coefficient for gender increased a little bit. We see that the tier list that decreased a little bit, but overall still holds the same idea. The value still goes up over time, or the value still goes down over time, being over in standard here. Remember, this is just a random effects model here, so there are some obvious issues. But why am I doing this and not just a fixed effects model here is because, as I noted earlier, if we have a fixed effects model here, things that doesn't change over time, I can't get an estimate for, so that becomes very, very tricky. I could, of course, conduct various tests to see which one should be preferred. I think that's above the scope what I can do here today, but I can just do what we call a Houseman test, for instance, without yapping too much statistical nonsense here. What we do see is just how, again, what is the takeaway message here? Female cards, more expensive, we knew this already, but now it's just to confirm it in numbers here. Cards higher on the tier list, more expensive, the more desirable, the better cards essentially. And we get mixed results in the standard format. If I look at it, remember when I looked at it just for a cross-sectional thing, we noticed that if it's in the standard format, it's more expensive. That makes sense because it's more desirable to play with right now. Although this current standard format is very different from our normal standard formats because we don't or barely have any ERL tournaments. They are not up yet, or not official events at least. So we don't see that. And then of course we also see here, no, that's actually what we had to say here. Of course I also looked briefly on the time series aspect here, that was a little more tricky. I should have looked at the average value, for instance. That's just some of the things. But this is just some of the beginning analysis I can do here, and in the days to come I can sit down and try and look at this again and try to build on this analysis a little bit more. Or I can let my students do this in a section to come. I don't know. But I think at this point here, if you have any suggestions for any characteristics I can include, like any other variables that can help me explain price fluctuations over time for these cards here, or other cards I can just take price on Charizard over time or something like that. I should be able to obtain some information on that. But just to say, this is what you can actually get out of it. So we observed the things that you may have guessed, but it's very nice to be able to quantify these things. I think they're quite good. And on that, I would like to end with a little motivate. Motivate. Let's try and use that one. If you're going through hell, keep going. That's a nice way. Thanks, Winston Churchill, for that quote. And with a quote from Winston Churchill, let's... well, that already sounds like this is just boring statistics. I hope you found it a little interesting for those of you who watched out there. And again, feel free to post any comments you may have. And let's see if I can... I think the most interesting part of this data set here today is this one. This was the cross-sectional effect of the price on May 6th, I think it was, this year. Where you notice these very interesting effects for whether cards belongs to a different block, or whether the gender is female, or whether it belongs in standard or a tier list. You do see some significant effects on the gender, standard, and tier list part here, showing what the price increase would be. Everything here in euros. But takeaway message, you're standard, price goes up. Card as a female, the price goes up even more insanely than before. If you're higher on the tier list for each step on this 7-step tier list from A to F, you go up in value. Makes sense. And yeah, thanks for watching. This was my attempt on a little basic Pokémetrics. There's a lot more to do out there. I apologize for all the mistakes that was made here. That's what happens when you do things on the fly, but maybe I can polish this up in the future, maybe do something more with it. Hope you enjoy, guys, and well, until next time. Bye.